I held my hand out, ready to greet the incoming chief executive officer. That was all it took for the chairman of the board to decide I did not belong at his table. He did not even look at my face first. He looked at my outstretched hand, then at the folder tucked under my left arm, and finally at the floral arrangement I was holding. It was a bundle of white lilies and fresh eucalyptus, the exact kind of display someone's administrative assistant orders when they want a cold boardroom to look welcoming for a major announcement. The cameras in the corners of the room were already rolling, their small red lights glowing. 3 separate angles had been set up. One camera was for the internal employee broadcast, one was for the external investment partners, and the third was for the archive that nobody ever thinks about until a massive scandal breaks. I stepped up beside his leather chair, extended my hand toward the incoming leader, and said, "Welcome to Keystone Holdings." Before the new executive could react, the chairman turned his head, took in my gesture, and gave a small scoff directly into his lapel microphone. "I do not shake hands with low-level employees," he said, loud enough to be crystal clear in the room and on every active stream broadcasting to our partners. "My name is Roger Miller. I am 56 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the managing partner of Miller Strategic Capital. My father used to tell me that respect is not earned in tiny drops and lost in massive buckets. He believed it is the foundation you either build a life on or watch crumble beneath your feet. He learned that basic truth in the jungles of Vietnam. I learned it in the boardrooms of corporate America. Before I ever touched a financial statement, I spent 12 years serving as a Marine Corps infantry officer. I survived 2 deployments in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. You learn things in active combat that the professors at Harvard Business School cannot teach. You learn that true leadership is not about having the loudest voice in the room. You learn that respect must flow in both directions, regardless of a person's rank. And you learn that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. My father, Colonel George Miller, came home from Vietnam in 1971 with a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a simple philosophy. If you are going to trust people with something important, watch how they treat the people who cannot help them first. He applied that principle when he started Miller Strategic Capital in 1975. He began with small regional deals, family money, and local businesses, but he possessed a rare nose for character. And character, it turned out, was a much better predictor of long-term success than most modern financial metrics. When I retired from the military in 2008, my father was ready to step back from the daily operations. The firm had grown far beyond his comfort zone, involving institutional money, billion-dollar deals, and international exposure. The firm needs someone who understands how the world works now, he told me as we sat in his study. But do not you ever forget why we started this business in the first place. I never did. Every deal we structured, every partnership we entered, came with what we called the Miller Standard. We do not just bet on corporate business models. We bet on the human beings running them. And if those people cannot demonstrate basic human decency when they think nobody important is watching, then they do not get a single cent of our money. That strict standard had cost us deals over the years, plenty of them. But it had also saved us from spectacular, ruinous failures, the kind that make the front pages, end promising careers, and lead to congressional investigations. 3 months ago, Keystone Holdings came across my desk during what I had started thinking of as my final major transaction. At 56, with my son finishing his business degree at Wharton, I was actively planning my own retirement timeline. This transaction would either cement our firm's reputation for the next generation or teach me some very expensive lessons about the price of holding on to principles. Keystone was a massive conglomerate of mid-market businesses, logistics, industrial services, and a technology platform they could not explain clearly, even in their own marketing materials. Their outgoing chief executive officer had spent 5 years acquiring companies like Cheap Souvenirs, heavily leveraging the balance sheet and cutting operational muscle instead of fat. Now they desperately needed cash and credibility to survive. We structured a $2.5 billion commitment across multiple stages. It was not just our capital. We were leading a large consortium of institutional investors who trusted our due diligence. The stakes could not have been higher for me personally. My son, Zachary Miller, had been recruited by Keystone for their prestigious executive development program. He was considering the offer seriously, seeing it as a route to learn the corporate structure from a different angle before joining the family firm. Dad, their program is supposed to be top tier, he had told me over dinner 2 weeks before our scheduled closing meeting, and working somewhere else first might make me a much better partner for you eventually. I had encouraged him to explore the opportunity. Now I was about to see exactly what kind of organization would be shaping his early professional career. The deal included our standard conduct integrity provision, but this time I had insisted on something extra. Any documented behavior during negotiations that materially harmed the reputational standing of the company or its incoming leadership would trigger not just capital withdrawal, but a full network freeze. Miller Strategic Capital had spent 47 years building relationships in the investment community. One call from me could blacklist a management team across multiple firms. It was not theoretical. 2 years earlier, we had walked away from a $600 million infrastructure deal when video surfaced of their chairman humiliating a line worker at a public town hall. We lost fees, time, and energy. But 6 months later, when that company imploded under regulatory scrutiny and union actions, every institutional investor who had followed our lead privately thanked us for the early warning. This time felt different, though. Bigger stakes, more scrutiny, and the added complexity of family considerations. If this deal went sideways, it would not just affect our firm's reputation. It would affect my son, Zachary's career prospects in an industry where reputations follow you forever. That is why I had insisted on attending the transition meeting personally, despite my team's suggestions to send a junior representative. I needed to see how the leadership of Keystone Holdings operated when they thought the hard work was done, and the cameras were mostly ceremonial. Walter Higgins had been skeptical from the start. Keystone's rapid expansion seemed like a house of cards, built on cheap credit and aggressive marketing rather than solid business fundamentals. We had spent weeks reviewing their books, analyzing their supply chains, and interviewing their regional managers. Every report pointed to the same conclusion. The underlying companies were profitable, but the corporate leadership was hollow. They were more concerned with quarterly earnings calls and stock buybacks than the long-term health of their operations. We are putting our reputation on the line with this consortium. Walter had warned me during our final review meeting in our Chicago office. If they default, it will not just be our capital that is lost. It will be the trust we have built over decades with our co-investors. I had agreed, which is why the conduct clause was so restrictive, and why I wanted to see their boardroom culture firsthand. The invitation had been formal. A board strategy session and chief executive officer transition announcement. They had not put my name on the attendee list, just Miller Strategic Capital representative, to be determined. My partner Walter had raised an eyebrow at that when he read the agenda. "They do not know you are coming," he had observed, leaning back in his office chair. "They will," I had replied. As I boarded the flight that morning, I had received a text from my son, Zachary. "Dad, heard Keystone is announcing their new chief executive officer today. Mom says you are flying out there personally. Is everything okay?" I had typed back, "Just want to see what we are investing in. Let us talk tonight." I had no idea I was about to discover exactly what kind of company had been recruiting my son. The flight gave me time to think about what my father would have made of this situation. He had built Miller Strategic Capital on a simple Marine Corps principle: reconnaissance before engagement. Know your terrain, know your enemy, and know your exit strategy. He had drilled it into me during my early years at the firm. "Son, the minute you stop paying attention to character, character starts paying attention to you." I landed at noon, changed in the airport lounge, and took a car straight to the downtown headquarters of Keystone Holdings. It was a 42-story tower of glass and steel, the kind of building that screams successful corporation from 3 blocks away. The lobby was all polished marble, chrome accents, and massive digital displays. A share price ticker ran on one wall, and a corporate video loop ran on another, showing smiling workers and aerial shots of distribution centers. The receptionist looked up as I approached. She was young, professional, with a practiced corporate smile. "Welcome to Keystone Holdings," she said. "How may I help you?" "I am Roger Miller, here for the board meeting." Her fingers paused over the keyboard for just a beat too long. Then she typed quickly. "Of course, Mr. Miller. Someone from Investor Relations will be right down." Investor Relations, I noted. Not executive services, not the board liaison. That told me everything I needed to know about how they saw this visit. In the Marines, we called it misreading the battlefield. It usually did not end well. A few minutes later, Sean Kelly appeared. He was in his mid-30s, wearing an expensive suit that did not quite fit right, carrying the nervous energy of someone trying too hard to project confidence. "Mr. Miller, great to meet you," he said, offering a hand. "I will take you right up." The elevator ride was highly instructive. Sean filled the silence with nervous chatter about the exciting day ahead and the historic partnership opportunities. When I asked about the board's general mood, he hesitated before landing on eager and optimistic. "And the outgoing chief executive officer?" I asked. "Grateful for the opportunity to transition," he said carefully. "It has been a collaborative process." In military translation, that meant someone got pushed out and was not happy about it. The executive floor was quieter, with thicker carpet and better art. Sean led me past framed photos of corporate milestones, ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, and handshake photos with politicians and business leaders, the kind of wall that says we matter to visitors. And remember when we mattered to employees, I thought. We stopped outside the double-glass doors marked Boardroom Alpha. 2 cameras were mounted above, their red lights currently dark. "Those are for the live stream," Sean explained when he caught me looking. Chairman Jenkins wanted full transparency for this transition. I had done my homework on Bradley Jenkins during the due diligence phase. He was in his early 60s, a classic East Coast establishment type with a business degree from Wharton, a consulting background, and 3 previous chief executive officer positions at mid-tier companies. His public profile was a masterpiece of corporate speak, all about transformational leadership and stakeholder value optimization. What the research had not captured was his character. Numbers do not lie, but they do not tell the whole truth either. You need to see people in action to understand who they really are. Sean opened the doors, and I stepped inside. The boardroom looked like it had been ordered from the executive power section of a corporate furniture catalog. There was a 20-foot polished mahogany table, high-backed leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and wall-mounted screens already displaying the opening slide. Keystone Holdings, Leadership Transition and Strategic Partnership. A few people were already seated. Bradley Jenkins was at the head of the table, holding court with 2 board members. Brandon Vance, the incoming chief executive officer, was halfway down the table studying a presentation deck. The communications team was in the back setting up streaming equipment. In the corner, on a side table, sat a floral arrangement of white lilies and eucalyptus, the same arrangement I had approved when Miller Strategic Capital agreed to sponsor the event. It was a nice touch, except they had clearly expected their capital partner to send someone junior enough to handle flower delivery. "They asked me to bring those in," I mentioned to Sean, nodding toward the arrangement. He picked up the flowers and handed them to me without question. "Perfect," Sean said. Chairman Jenkins likes attention to details like that. The chairman of the board commanded attention even while sitting. Bradley Jenkins possessed that particular brand of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who mattered. He had a sharp suit, perfect posture, and a smile that stopped just short of his eyes. He was currently explaining something to the directors beside him, using hand gestures that suggested the topic was either very important or very obvious. As I approached the table carrying the flowers, I caught fragments of their conversation. They were talking about regional partners understanding the hierarchy and how it was important to set the right tone from day one. Bradley glanced up as I got closer, taking in the flowers first, then my suit, and finally my lack of obvious corporate credentials. I had no company badge, no banker's folder, and no entourage of junior staff. I was just a middle-aged guy in a good suit, carrying an arrangement someone had asked him to deliver. "Perfect," he said. "Not to me, but about me." "Set those on the side table," he directed. I placed the flowers on the main table instead, right within his line of sight but not where he had directed. It was a small test. Bradley noticed but did not comment, turning back to his conversation about managing expectations. Brandon Vance looked up from his presentation materials as I approached. He was younger than I had expected, in his late 30s, with a good haircut, an expensive watch, and eyes that held just a trace of uncertainty beneath the polished exterior. He had been recruited from a competitor specifically to clean up the previous administration's acquisition spree. What Brandon did not know yet was that my son, Zachary, had been recruited by that same competitor 6 months earlier and had turned them down. The culture felt off, Zachary had told me at the time. Great opportunities on paper, but something about the way they talked about people did not sit right. I extended my hand toward Brandon. "Welcome to Keystone," I said. "I am Roger." That was when Bradley Jenkins showed me exactly what kind of leader he was, exactly what kind of organization he ran, and exactly why my son would never work there. Before Brandon could respond, Bradley turned his attention our way. He saw my gesture, saw an opportunity to establish hierarchy, and decided to make it crystal clear to everyone in the room, including the cameras that had just started recording, where a flower-carrying nobody belonged in his corporate universe. He leaned slightly toward his microphone, his smile widening, and delivered the line that would cost his company $2,500,000,000. "I do not shake hands with low-level employees," he said. The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. "In the Marines, we had a saying, the first shot tells you where the enemy is, the second shot tells you who they are." Bradley Jenkins had just fired both barrels. The reaction was immediate and telling. A board member to Bradley's right chuckled reflexively, the kind of nervous laugh that says, "I know this is wrong, but I am not brave enough to say it." Someone halfway down the table made a sound that could have been amusement or discomfort. A communication staffer at the back covered his mouth with a folder, but his eyes were wide with the recognition that this was going out live. Brandon Vance, the incoming chief executive officer, did not laugh. He looked from my extended hand to Bradley, then down at the table like he had suddenly found the agenda fascinating. He did not correct the chairman. He did not say that is inappropriate. He just studied his notes and waited for the moment to pass. I kept my hand extended for several seconds, not out of stubbornness, but because 12 years of military service had taught me something about power dynamics that Bradley Jenkins had apparently missed. When someone attempts to disrespect you publicly, your response defines not just the moment, but every interaction that follows. Bradley noticed I had not withdrawn my hand. His smile faltered just slightly, like he had expected immediate compliance and was mildly annoyed by my failure to read the script. "I am here as instructed," I said, keeping my voice level. "Military bearing, my father would have called it, calm under fire." Bradley leaned back in his chair, making no effort to hide his contempt. "Then stand where you are told," he replied. "This meeting is for executives." In that moment, I thought about my son Zachary, 25 years old, with an MBA from Wharton, smart enough to see through corporate nonsense, but young enough to think he could change a toxic culture from the inside. He had been genuinely excited about Keystone's program. Now, I was watching the chairman of that company demonstrate exactly what kind of leadership culture Zachary would be walking into. I lowered my hand slowly, placed the flowers deliberately on the table, within Bradley's sightline, and walked to the empty chair at the far end of the table. There was no nameplate waiting for me and no official recognition of my role. "Let us begin," Bradley announced, already turning toward the main screen. The opening slide appeared. Keystone Holdings, Leadership Transition and Strategic Partnership. He launched into his prepared remarks about historic partnerships and strategic alignment. Standard corporate theater delivered with the confidence of someone who had never had his assumptions challenged in a boardroom. I listened, watching not just Bradley, but the dynamics around the table. Who nodded along? Who checked their phones? Who seemed uncomfortable? 3 slides in, I spoke up. "Before you go any further," I said, loud enough to cut through Bradley's momentum, "there is one thing you should know." Bradley turned, visibly irritated by the interruption. "We are not taking commentary from support staff during this session," he said. You can submit feedback through the proper channels afterward. If you are refusing to shake my hand, I replied, maintaining the same level tone, then by tomorrow morning, $2,500,000,000 will no longer be part of this deal. The silence that followed was not the dramatic gasp of a Hollywood film. It was the vacuum that forms when reality suddenly shifts. Phones stopped moving. Pens froze mid-sentence. Someone laughed after a beat, a forced sound trying to snap the room back to its script. "Save the theatrics," Bradley said, his smile brittle. "Capital deployment is being handled through proper channels." "I am the proper channel," I replied. You could feel the shift in the room's energy. Harold Fowler, the chief financial officer, looked up from his notes with the expression of someone doing rapid mental calculations. He glanced at me, then at Bradley, then back at his paperwork. "Before we proceed," he said carefully, "we should confirm final authorization protocols for the capital commitment." "Legal will handle the documentation," Bradley snapped, waving off the concern. "With respect," Harold continued, "the release requires direct confirmation from the authorized signatory." Direct confirmation. His eyes found mine across the table. "That would be me," I said quietly. Bradley's head swiveled back to me, really looking this time. "You are claiming authority over the capital deployment?" he asked slowly. "I am Roger Miller, managing partner of Miller Strategic Capital. I have sole signatory authority over our $2,500,000,000 commitment. Our withdrawal unravels the entire refinancing structure." Harold was nodding, confirming what his financial models had told him. Bradley straightened in his chair, trying to regain control. "Perhaps we should restart with proper introductions," he said, his voice careful. "If you would like," I replied, "but the damage is already done." I stood up and walked out of the boardroom to make a phone call. In the quiet alcove by the elevator, I dialed Walter Higgins. "Activate the withdrawal clause," I said, "effective immediately. Full amount." There was a pause. Walter had been my partner for 8 years. "All $2,500,000,000, he asked. "All of it," I confirmed. "Conduct violation during negotiations." But I was not done. I called our lead corporate counsel and instructed them to run a forensic digital check on the signature pages Bradley Jenkins had submitted yesterday for the closing escrow. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with the attorney's urgent findings. Jenkins had forged the incoming chief executive officer's signature on a critical amendment regarding debt covenants to hide their massive liabilities. It was a clear violation of California Penal Code Section 470, which governs forgery. Under corporate law, a contract containing forged signatures is void ab initio, meaning it is legally void from its very inception. We did not just have a contract breach, we had a criminal act. I walked back into the boardroom and placed my phone on the table. The red recording light on the stream was still on. Harold Fowler was presenting the financial projections when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and the color drained from his face. The words died in his throat. Another phone buzzed, then another, a low electronic chorus spreading across the table. "Let us silence devices," Bradley said sharply. "We are in the middle of critical material." Harold was not moving. He was staring at his screen like someone had just told him his house was on fire. "Harold?" Bradley said, "Is there an issue?" "The Miller Strategic Commitment," Harold said quietly, his voice trembling. "It has been officially withdrawn." The silence this time was the absolute quiet of a machine losing power. "Withdrawn how?" Bradley demanded. "We are in active negotiations." "Executed and confirmed," Harold said. "The withdrawal of the full $2,500,000,000 is effective immediately." "That is not possible," a board member said. "The conduct clause allows for it," Harold corrected. "And there is something worse. Mr. Miller has submitted a formal notice of fraud." I leaned forward. "It is more than a breach of contract," I said, looking directly at the board members. "We have uncovered that Bradley Jenkins forged the signature of the incoming chief executive officer on the debt covenant amendment to conceal 30% of their outstanding debt. This is a direct violation of California Penal Code Section 470. Under the law, a contract executed through forgery is void ab initio. It is legally dead, and it exposes this entire board to severe criminal liability if you attempt to enforce or cover up this transaction." The reaction was immediate. Board members scrambled to call their personal attorneys. Brandon Vance, The incoming chief executive officer looked horrified, realizing his name had been used in a felony forgery scheme without his consent. Bradley stood up, his face red, trying to shout down the panic. "This is a baseless accusation, a cheap negotiation tactic," he screamed. "It is documented, and the proof has already been transmitted to the federal regulators," I said, standing up. "Your board has a choice to make. Either you proceed with this fraud and face prosecution, or you clean your house." The board made the logical choice. Within an hour, Bradley Jenkins was placed on emergency administrative leave, and the board's audit committee initiated an independent investigation into the forgery. By the next morning, the authorities had been notified of the California Penal Code violation, and the stock of Keystone Holdings had fallen by 40%. The refinancing deal was dead, and Bradley's long career in corporate America was over, replaced by the prospect of a federal indictment. The office regulators did not waste any time. By that Friday, the Securities and Exchange Commission had launched a formal inquiry into Keystone's financial reporting, and the local district attorney's office was preparing a grand jury subpoena for the physical records. It was a swift, clinical fall from grace. Bradley's reputation, built over decades of calculated corporate moves, dissolved in a matter of days. He went from being one of the most feared executives on the street to a cautionary tale discussed in hushed tones in the lobby of his own building. The board tried to reach out to me multiple times to negotiate a settlement, hoping that a change in leadership would convince our consortium to return. They offered to give us 2 board seats and complete oversight over all future mergers and acquisitions. But I remained firm in my decision. "This is not about oversight," I told the lead director during our last phone conversation. "It is about character. You built a corporate culture where your chairman thought he could forge documents and humiliate people, and everyone went along with it. I will not fund that." That evening, I called my son Zachary from the airport lounge. "Dad, I heard something happened with Keystone today," he said. "The stock got hammered, and social media is sharing a boardroom video." "What did you see?" I asked. "A clip of their chairman refusing to shake hands with a representative, being incredibly arrogant. People are calling it corporate arrogance at its worst." He paused. "Dad, that was you, wasn't it?" "It was," I said. Zachary was quiet for a long moment. "What did you do?" "I did what your grandfather would have done," I said. "I walked away and I had our team expose the fraud they were trying to hide." Zachary sighed, but there was pride in his voice. "How much did it cost our firm?" "About $20 million in potential advisory fees," I said. "Was it worth it?" I thought about my father's philosophy, about character being the foundation you build on, and about the kind of leaders we choose to fund. "Yes," I said, "it was worth every single penny." A week later, Zachary called to tell me he had accepted a position with a different investment firm. "The culture is completely different," he said. "They focus on transparency and they actually respect their people. It is the kind of place where a handshake still means something." That night, I sat in my father's old study, looking at his Bronze Star citation on the wall. Sometimes the battlefield is a boardroom, and the risk is financial rather than physical, but the principles remain exactly the same. There are lines you do not cross, and there are consequences for those who forget the difference. Bradley Jenkins thought a low-level employee was beneath him. He thought he could forge signatures to save his empire. In the end, his arrogance cost his company $2,500,000,000 and cost him his freedom. In business, as in life, character is not something you can fake.